Welcome back to Next Step Career Corner, the podcast where we talk about career clarity, confidence, and taking bold steps towards leadership and impact. I'm your host, Stephanie Rank, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by a powerhouse in the world of leadership development, Michelle Choate. Michelle is a facilitator, keynote speaker, and executive coach with over 25 years of experience working with leaders and teams in healthcare, nonprofits, government, higher education, and tech. She's known for helping people master self-leadership, strengthen emotional intelligence, and build the clarity and confidence needed to lead effectively, especially in complex, high-stake environments. In this episode, we're diving into what it means to lead as a woman today, navigating change, reclaiming your voice, and leading with purpose. Whether you're already in a leadership role or aspiring to grow into one, Michelle brings wisdom, strategy, and heart to the conversation. So let's get started. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, it is so great such a pleasure.
Thank you for being here. I've been very excited about this conversation for so
Me
long.
too. Me too.
So let's kick it off. So
Great.
you've spent 25 years in helping leaders navigate complex environments. What drew you to this work originally, and how has your perspective changed over time?
I didn't know that organization development was an industry when I started recognizing the interface of people, process, technologies, and systems. Like those things were happening around me. And in every job I had up until the early thousands, I would work with teams and leaders outside of my regular scope, trying to increase their capacity to manage for systems that were broken, processes or policies or standards that didn't support best human behavior and best outcome. And I would see things that reflected, as I learned later, as my perspective evolved, that often the bad behaviors were based in a sense of powerlessness. Things were being done to people. They were not experiencing ownership or choice in their workplaces, in their workplace relationships. And success measures were often arbitrary and not inclusive of what it means to work with people rather than for people. And so when I would see behaviors like talking about each other instead of to each other, or blaming, the kind of behaviors that undermine team outcomes, I really started to get attuned to that. When I joined organization development as a practice, I worked in a large healthcare system. And my daughter called my job, when people would ask her, she was young, she makes nurses be nice to each other, which wasn't actually accurate. What I learned there was a more intimate view into what it meant to work in high intensity, high complexity, high reliability organizations where risk is great, and how the systems in those organizations further create separation from human relation and focus more on survival behavior, which is ultimately what culture is, organizational culture. So my continued development has included, how do I help people individually, teams, organizations create a capacity to generate choice in their daily interactions rather than limit choice, which brings me around to my emotional intelligence practice. And with greater choice, of course, we have more power. So that's my journey as a professional. I've now been working on my own for 5.5 years, and that is my primary focus, is to help people generate choice and take back their power.
So that leads into my next question. So
Sure.
how would you define self-leadership then? Why is it a critical foundation for women leaders today?
That's a topic I've been evolving for years and years, and I've come to what I believe is a sound basis for the concept. So if you think about leading others, which is, I'm going to be a leader, I'm going into leadership, which is a position. There is some imbued kind of positional power around that. That doesn't always increase your influence in a productive way, nor does it help you as a leader help others generate choice and maximize their capacity to serve. So in that context of self-leadership, I really look at leading self before you lead other. And in order to do that effectively, to be grounded in your values, to be intentional about the products you create and how you influence, you have to start with self-awareness. I need to know myself to be able to manage myself. And management is both behavioral and emotional. A lot of people think emotions just happen to us. We choose our emotions. We label them. They are not something that happen to us. We create them, so we can manage them. The other quality that I've been really focused on over the last couple of years is self-compassion. We often especially as women leaders, often overextend ourselves in service of others and then are harder on ourselves than anybody else. And the capacity to see ourselves as a human, to treat ourselves with kindness, and to be attentive to our own needs is paramount. If you're going to lead others, you must lead self first in a compassionate way. And then some very specific qualities around growth mindset, the willingness and ability to learn, which requires humility and courage, which are not qualities you always see in leaders.
Right.
And, usually it's the opposite. Like it's more of an assertion of power. Being a learner, a lifelong learner, and I don't mean that in a soft sense, but truly every day, seeing every day as a learning opportunity means being humble every day and courageous every day. And then the final quality of self-leadership has to do with having a deep understanding of your motivation in every given moment, what drives you to behave. And with good emotional self-management, you can also be more intentional about your motivation. How do you want to influence people? And that's what we have to do. We have to be able to manage self to influence others and trust ourselves by knowing deeply and committing to behaving in ways that are in alignment with motivations that are more than us and include us, which is a very big nuance.
Yeah, taking care of yourself, managing yourself is huge. I feel like I've been going through that personally,
Yeah,
with my business, with my cancer journey, losing my friend recently. It's been very much let myself react, but react in a way that's not detrimental to myself or to my clients or to my colleagues, anything like that. And the motivations have been huge because if I've done a lot of value work recently, and so
great.
if I'm not going toward my values, I'm just not as motivated. I'm not happy, right? It takes a lot of digging to understand yourself and what makes you joyful and motivated.
Yep.
And then once you know yourself, you can learn about others and how they can behave and how they behave and what they react to and what's
Right.
positive. Yeah, it's
Well,
huge.
and that quality, that self-awareness gives us the ability to, and this is, I think, a really important quality of emotional intelligence that I work with all of my clients on, recognize that when I am having an emotion, others perceive that emotion and take it as a data point. They receive my emotion as data, then they attach meaning to it. And if I can't clearly express my motive that helps people understand why I'm feeling, the basis for that feeling, and the needs that I have because of that feeling, their assumptions are often not going to be as generous as my motive. And then we have miscommunication or misperception. So there's a huge quality around that willingness to see someone else's emotion, not as a threat, not in as a judgment, but truly as a data point that says, whoa, they're feeling in response to me. What am I giving them? So how am I behaving? And then knowing that because emotions are something that I create, I use as a sense-making process. If I am feeling something strongly, that's data as well. And how do I use that data to better assess the environment and make more effective determinations about how I want to make a difference in that space? That is something, Stephanie, that is so cool about women, especially those who are really working on this quality of these qualities of personal development. There's some really important data that is tracked by a company called 6 Seconds. They do emotional intelligence work. And in their recent, they call it State of the Heart survey, they have noted over the last 5 years, emotional intelligence globally has been decreasing. In the last 2 years, the subset that are those who self-describe or self-identify as women, scores are rebounding in emotional intelligence. So women are demonstrating a higher level of resilience in the face of the complexity that we have. And we don't always honor that gift and that ability. Instead, we question ourselves further, which brings me back to self-compassion. So it's really an important set of knowledge that we could be helping others recognize in the workplace as leaders, as models for good emotional intelligence behaviors. Because we got
Yeah,
them, we do them naturally.
we do them naturally. And I
Yeah.
think women, especially, the resilience is key. think about what we go through in a lifetime, right? Like maybe you have kids, maybe you don't. Maybe you have hormone imbalances, maybe you don't. Maybe you have cancer. Healthcare, our bodies change. Then we have
Mhm.
menopause and all of the things. And we have to be self-aware and know the emotional intelligence so we can recognize it and handle it,
Mhm.
right? And not be
Yes,
a basket case
and honor it.
and honor
That's
it.
a big part of the work that I do with women leaders is honoring what has gotten to them to this point, which is often a set of behaviors that kept us safe in complexity, and recognizing that those behaviors may not always be serving us any longer. So do we need to cope anymore? Are we actually under threat in any given situation? Only if we decide so.
Right.
And so being open, right? Opening ourselves up to the possibility that, yes, we're struggling, we're suffering, and that doesn't make us powerless. It actually, if we use that experience, gives us greater power over our choices and outcomes, and ultimately makes us better role models to other women and partners in the work.
Yeah, having that vulnerability too can help you connect and deepen your relationships with your team. Not that you have to share all the personal details, but if you're
Absolutely.
acknowledging that you're going through something, people support. I think people naturally gravitate toward that vulnerability and want to help.
They do. And as a woman leader, I think there's always the risk, right? Because one of the things I'm literally working with an organization right now, and I'm working on a team coaching of emotional intelligence and meeting with 8 individual contributors. And I have had 5 of the 8 say to me in a private meeting, well, emotions should be left at the door. You can't have emotions at work. And I'm heartened that the organization sees the value in emotional intelligence, that they're willing to invest in this team and help them see that emotions can actually be very productive. And also concerned that that modality of thinking came from men saying that emotions aren't valuable. And I can't prescribe anything in direction to that. I also believe that women reinforce that, like, oh, don't bring your drama to work. So when you talk about sharing vulnerably doesn't mean trauma bonding, and it doesn't mean creating drama. Those are not healthy ways to use emotional self-knowledge or self-awareness. Those are destructive to teams. What you want to be able to do is demonstrate, as you said, and I love the word vulnerability, the courage to be vulnerable in ways that are productive and intentional. So making those choices consciously and not just reacting emotionally and allowing the emotions to impact unintentionally.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So, what are some common emotional intelligence gaps that you see in female leaders?
One, it's such an important question. One of the things that I was thinking about as we prepared for our conversation today was the sense that women must demonstrate leadership as they were taught leadership, or leadership was given to them. And where women seem to struggle is an over expression of qualities of emotional intelligence like assertiveness at the expense of empathy. So
Hmm.
that's the very first thing there's a woman leader and I do an emotional intelligence assessment. And if I see a tendency that those scores might reinforce each other, that's the first place I'll start with. Women leaders are all leaders. And in this situation, as we discuss it, women leaders have to be that much more intentional about asserting and being compassionate. That is the gift that we can bring to the organization. And it doesn't have to be a compromise or a choice between the two. Whereas if you choose positional power, you end up undermining your ability to influence because your compassion is suppressed. The other thing, as I talked about briefly, is emotions are data. In a workplace, if we see someone emoting or we're having an emotion, that's normal. We are human. I mean, I think it's 3% of the population is sociopathic. And so emotions are not things that they can access or use effectively. Emotional intelligence is knowing I'm having an emotion, seeing you're having an emotion, and using that information productively. So being able to see someone feeling and being able to be with them is a compassionate leadership behavior. It doesn't mean you condone a bad behavior, and it doesn't mean you reward a bad behavior. It says you honor acknowledgement and then reorient through a coaching behavior. And the other thing that I worry about with women, well, there's two other things in terms of emotional intelligence. The first is this strong sense that their measures of success are external to them. What do others think of me? How do they feel about me? That extrinsic motivation means we're chronically striving to achieve some measure that we have no way of achieving because we have no way of knowing if we're making others feel, think, or be, unless we're using emotions as data. And so when organizations make goals or drive people to behave in certain ways to make certain outcomes, and that's the only measure of success, a whole slice of the human capacity to influence has been eliminated. So intrinsic motivation is something I focus on with women a lot. And I loved that you started talking about things like values. Mm-hmm. If we lead from our values as women, we have greater capacity to influence. And so you have to have both extrinsic measures of success, but also intrinsic. Am I behaving in ways that I'm proud of, that give me joy, that create purpose, that make a difference for others as well as for myself? So that extrinsic and intrinsic is really important. And then finally in EQ, and this is data from emotional intelligence organizations that study this, 6 Seconds pushed this one forward, I believe. As you advance in your career, you actually, some qualities of emotional intelligence decrease because you get less data. As a higher level leader, people are less likely to tell you what's going wrong because you're more likely to judge. And here's something else, you grow more optimistic, which is a quality of emotional intelligence. You can do it, team. Everything's going to be great. And no one's going to say, no, I can't. And it's not going to be great. And so your optimism increases. Your qualities of problem solving and assertiveness are all increasing as your empathy is decreasing. And that is a big red flag. So leaders, as you continue to evolve, pay attention to how you interact with each other, because you may be closing doors on critical data that can help you understand what your organization and the people around you need.
That's huge, right? Optimism, you wouldn't think optimism is a bad thing, but if you're so optimistic, they're not going to be truthful with you.
That's right. They don't want to let you down. And now you're going to position them for failure, burnout. And those are risk points that I don't know any organization can tolerate for a long term without having a big business impact.
Right. That is very huge. Okay, so let's go back. Okay, so how do women, we have these gaps, how do they reclaim their power? What does that look like in practice?
How do they reclaim their power? So the way that I think about this in emotional intelligence is the first place is recognizing that you have a right and a responsibility to exercise power. And so identifying what is and this is language others may have used before, what is within your sphere of control. It's your thoughts, behaviors, it's your emotions, they are within your control, and your ability to influence. All of those are things that you can adjust for. So that's where I always start, is what can you control? When people have boundaries that are I say squishy to make that word accessible, but really when their boundaries are weak, they take responsibility for more than is theirs and then take on the emotional burden of more than is theirs. And so I really ask women to focus on setting healthy boundaries, taking responsibility not for others' outcomes, but being responsible to provide all of the resources, guidance, information, coaching, particularly mentoring if needed. And that is something you can be responsible to do. If you offer that and someone is not successful, you don't take that burden on. That is them. So healthy boundaries are a huge, huge part of what I coach with women leaders. The other is to use emotional information in a meaningful way. Don't ignore it. Don't avoid it. Oftentimes we see emotions as something that are scary. Like, how do we manage this emotion that someone else is having? That's not our job. It's their job. Our job is to create a space. We are responsible to create a space where someone can experience an emotion and manage it themselves productively. and then allow us to use that information to be a better guide. That's a quality or characteristic I would love to see leaders be more intentional about. The other thing that I really try to focus on with women leaders in particular is daily goal setting around these qualities of influence, and use that as kind of the basis for self-leadership. Every day you can learn and be better. And if we start every day, and this is literally something I do with my coaching clients, look at your calendar. What are the 5 meetings you have that day? What is your role in each of those meetings? What do people need from you? And how are you going to show up for each of those meetings? And you'll literally brainstorm that for 5 minutes at the beginning of your day. Just take a minute each. Who am I supposed to be when I'm in there? How do I know I'm delivering what's expected of me? And how I'm going to show up as my best self? And then at the end of the day, review your goals. How did I do? Where was I super effective? Where were there opportunities for me to be more effective? Often it's lack of data. So, one outcome my client was just talking to me about last week was they needed me to do something I wasn't prepared to do. So I learned in the future, I will contact them and verify ahead of the meeting rather than just assume I know what's going to happen in there, what my role is. So it's a daily practice of making sure you're focusing on what's 100% within your control, and then and this is something we really suck at, giving yourself grace and congratulations when we do a great job. Like at the end of the day, it's not just what did I not do well, it's affirming the best of who you are. And often that should be in alignment with your values. Where did I show up with authenticity, with purpose, with human-centeredness? Those are the things that we can bring.
There's so many coaching principles in what you just said. There's managers, maybe this is something we can push, but organizations should think about getting their managers and leaders into coaching programs to learn how to do those things. And then goal setting. I mean, it's huge. And giving yourself grace. I am that person. I am a type A overachiever all the way. And I recently started just a nutrition program to get healthier after my cancer. And the first week was just a disaster. I had a lot of external things going on. And I did like my little check-in, and I used the word failed. Like I felt like I failed. And my coach was like, no, give yourself grace. And when I thought back, I'm like, yeah, I did the best I could.
That's right.
There have been times in meetings that I've said something that my intent is not what I verbalize, right? And I kick myself. I'm like, oh, I shouldn't have drawn attention to me, or I shouldn't have said that. Like it came out wrong. But I have to trust that they know me. My team knows me, and they know my intentions. And mistakes happen, right? And only thing we could do is learn from them and prepare and just keep moving forward.
And forgive ourselves, give ourselves compassion. We're just human. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. No one is perfect. And that willingness to see every situation not as a potential to fail in, but another one to grow or learn in is a growth mindset. And I really honor the example that you just used. That every day we have a choice to do our best. Now our best could be 40% or 90%. If you've done your best, that's all you can do. Congratulate yourself for doing your best and let it go. And if you hear in your own internal dialogue, a voice, a word, a practice that undermines that capacity, that voice needs to be seen and silenced. That voice, the one that judges us, the one that treats us harshly, the one that tells us we failed, at one point in our life probably was developed as a skill set to keep us safe from something. And it no longer serves us anymore. And we often let that internal voice, our conscious, if you want to call it, drive our behavior, which drives us into fight or flight, which means we lose our capacity to reason and think through these kinds of complexities. So we need to be able to say to that, I hear you. I recognize you. I honor you've helped me in the past. Today is not the day I need your insights. I need you to move to the back of the bus, and you don't get to touch the radio. This is my day, not yours. If I need you, I know you're there. So that's one thing I want people to realize is, and this is the self-leadership part of it. Like if I am saying or doing things to myself, that is not compassionate to self. That is not self-management. That is self-flagellation. And that is not cool.
Right.
It's unkind to self, not cool.
Yeah, it's very unkind. Okay, so how about imposter syndrome? How do you help women leaders navigate that? Because that is a huge issue I see with my clients.
Yeah. Imposter syndrome. So I had a really interesting situation. Many years ago, I was coaching a man, and he was describing these qualities of, I just don't know if I should be here. Am I the right person for the position? What if I've overextended myself? What if they don't really know how little I know? I mean, it was all the classic, like, am I good enough? Am I smart enough? Do people like me thinking? And I said, have you ever heard of the phrase imposter syndrome? He said, I have no idea what you're talking about. So imposter syndrome, like anyone can get this sense that I'm not good enough, and that others may find out. That women experience it to the degree that we've given it a like quality, like we've given it power by naming it such, is one of the places where we can take back our power. I just said to this, one of the individuals I'm coaching on this team yesterday, if you name it, you tame it. It's not a thing we overcome. It's a set of qualities or characteristics that we must manage for. So the first one I always think about, is how are you being kind to yourself? And when we talked about values, and it'll come back to that again, if my values are honesty, for example, that's one that people often pull up. Well, I really believe in honesty. That's one of my values I hold really dear. I'm like, how are you honest with yourself? How, when you make a mistake or overstep, are you honest with yourself, contextually appropriate, and compassionate with yourself? So it's both a values-based behavior set and a self-compassion practice that brings people back into context. The other thing that's a part of emotional intelligence is a quality called reality testing. And so it's our ability to see our environment with greater objectivity and not through the filter of emotion. And so with greater objectivity, we can start to see that we are as effective or more than others. We have every right to be at the table. Our voice matters. Our qualities and skills are such that we have every capacity to be capable. We choose to. Things won't keep us from doing so. And so using a reality testing mindset is really helpful, separating us from the things that keep us from being able to be critical thinking in those complex spaces. And really, finally, honoring who you are. Like, you didn't get to where you are because you've been faking it till you make it.
Right.
I think you've probably heard the data about underqualified men get jobs more often than qualified women because men think there's nothing that can stop them, and women are the things that stop themselves. So recognizing, and can pull us back into reality testing, recognizing that we would not have gotten to where we are without the qualities and skills we have. And if we continue to be an authentic contributor to an organization, we must and will learn, and to not judge ourselves as harshly as we often do and think others may be.
Yeah, women are harder on themselves. And when I go through their profile, like working on their personal brand for their next role, or moving up in leadership, it's surprising how many times that they will tell me stories, their accomplishments, and then I write them down. And seeing it on paper freaks them out. Like, oh no, I sound too good for this. I'm like, but this is what you told me. This is exactly what you told me. I just put it in resume language. So,
right?
Yeah. And I also see I led the team, but the team did the work. Yes, but you led the team. What did you do did you mentor? Did you guide? Did you give them resources? Like, there's so many things that your leadership provided. You can talk about that. And so they lower themselves, and it's very much like, no, this is who you are. This is what you have done. This is the impact that you've had.
Yep. Yeah. I love that you call that out, Stephanie, because that part, that deferral, again, it's extrinsic. I want people to think I'm a humble leader. And so I will be humble to the point that I undermine my own authority, my own right to stand up for organizational outcomes. And ultimately, in service of others, I harm myself. One of the qualities of assertiveness as an emotional intelligence concept, and one that I've trained for 20 years, is that asserting is giving and getting respect. And
right.
So And so taking accountability for failure or success is something that we're responsible to do. And it's both. It's not just failures. Now, organizational leadership books will say, you fail with the team. When the team wins, then the team succeeds. I think your point about leading is so critical. The team could not have been led to success without your intentional work as a leader, and that you do this stuff you're responsible to do, and you're going to be effective.
Right. It's huge. It's huge.
It's
And
huge.
sometimes talking to somebody about it makes all the difference, right? When they recognize it. But
Right.
it is interesting how we initially like, oh, my thing was I was an admin, and I'm a part of an association that certifies career coaches and resume writers, and I still do admin work. And one of my goals this year is to do more leadership work than the admin work, because my tendency is, this is what I'm good at, I should be doing this. Well, so is my colleague. My colleague is also very good at this. So delegate, hand them the reins, and then I can think more big picture and do more. Because I'm at that point now where I'm talking with the program directors and I'm working on helping them elevate, and
That's right.
also know enough about the tools to tell them how they can elevate. But the admin stuff, but that's my tendency. Oh, I'm good at this. Let me do this.
That's right. And, as I noted, you get to a position because of the skills you have, but those skills are not going to take you past that position.
Correct.
You really have to commit to the learning, the development, and that requires sometimes not getting stuff right. And that's okay. If you're not as hard on yourself as you think others would be, you're probably going to be better in terms of your own capacity to develop, because you won't be in fight or flight all the time. So, to tie back around emotional intelligence, if we work from fear, our capacity to reason and critically think is diminished. And so what I really consider one of the key cornerstones of emotional intelligence development is recognizing that when we're able to push away from those experiences or take in data that says we should be afraid and see it simply as that, as data. Ooh, something's happening. I'm feeling. What is this feeling? This feeling is not actually contextually meaningful or effective. What other approach can I take? I'm opening up my capacity to reason through complexity rather than be buffeted by and a victim of it. Right. And that willingness to take risks also means being able to say, I learned a lot and I've grown a lot and I could do more and I could do different. I try to eliminate words like better, because that's a judgment word. So that's why I choose words like more and different. And all of that has to do with that internal dialogue.
It's huge.
It is huge.
So to wrap up today's episode, what would be your biggest advice for women leaders, whether they're in the role or they're emerging leaders and they want to be in that position?
So the very first thing, I'm working with a team right now where there's a new leader. It's a very complex environment, and they had to come into the organization without laying a lot of groundwork and make some very rapid changes because it was necessary. And now they're getting the blowback because they didn't have trust with their teams. They didn't have a relationship with their teams. They're being seen as the person who came in and changed everything. So my key advice is, don't underestimate the gift you've been given as a leader and as a woman to make connections with people. Invest in the relationships. I know it's a lot of work. Do it because you have the ability to do it. Maximize it straight up front. If you're moving from a peer to a leader, remember that those relationships must necessarily change, but that does not mean to eliminate them, because you need to maintain a trust basis with them. And recognize that women have a unique way that we can be allies in the workplace for other and underrepresented groups. And that is part of our charge in an organization. And so focusing on building relationships at every level and demonstrating and understanding what other people experience will increase others' trust in you and their followership. So use your emotional intelligence, use what is innately a gift of yours as a woman, and maximize that power.
That's amazing. So Michelle, if any of our listeners want to work with you, what is the best way to contact you?
You can go through my website, www.michellechoate, Choate, CHOATE.com. In terms of your personal and professional development, you can access me there for team coaching or individual coaching. I also speak on these topics, and I'm offering a new experience for women specifically on self-compassion. It's a 3-day retreat that's just going to be powerfully moving, and I'm so thrilled at this opportunity to bring amazing women leaders across my community together and really help them own their power in that way.
That's great. Thank you, Michelle, so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. I learned so much, and I hope our listeners did too.
The pleasure is truly mine. You're a gift. Thank you for this opportunity.